So let's say there's a game going on at Citi Field or the UTSA tennis stadium. Okay, then the nearest subway station is at Mets-Willets Point. Looking at a map, you can see where it is in plain sight. Hang on, there's another station with the same name of Mets-Willets Point as well, on the Long Island Railroad. What's going on here, and why do they both have the same name? Well, in this video, I will be answering that question, as well as discussing the history of the two. We're starting in the year of 1910. It's been 6 years since the opening of the first underground subway line, and two companies, the Interborough Rapid Transit Company and the Brooklyn Rapid Transit Company, have made an agreement known as the Dual Contracts to upgrade and construct new subway lines in Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. Queens, which was a pretty underdeveloped borough at the time, only received two new lines from the contracts. One of them being the BRT's Astoria line, and the other was the IRT's Flushing line. It would connect Long Island City to Flushing while allowing for development to take place between the two settlements. A majority of the line was built in the 1910s, but the station that we are focusing on opened on May 7, 1927, which back then was known as Willets Point Boulevard. This original station was actually located slightly east of the present Mets-Willets Point, but I'll get to that later. Willets Point Boulevard was actually a local stop, but it was also the terminus of the Flushing line at the time. Buses took passengers the rest of the way to Flushing until, on January 22, 1928, an actual station opened there, Flushing Main Street. In preparation for the 1939 World's Fair, it was planned for Willets Point Boulevard to expand to 3 tracks and 3 platforms, serving 40 trains in each direction. This would also complement the World's Fair line of the independent subway system, whose station for the fair would be east of Flushing Meadows Park. As for the entirety of the Flushing line, it would add on a 3rd track to provide express service for the fair as well. From 1955 to 1956, the platforms at Willets Point Boulevard would be extended to fit 11 cars. In preparation for the 1964 World's Fair, a new northbound side platform would be added, with a new ramp too. This platform is used by 7 trains on certain sports days. In the same year, the station itself was renamed to Willets Point Shea Stadium after Shea Stadium opened that year too. In July of 2007, Subaru Express trains were introduced, which provided fast service to Manhattan at the end of weekend Mets games. In April of 2008, the MTA also included weekend games too. The trains only made intermediate stops at 61st Street Woodside, Queensboro Plaza, and Court Square stations. Manhattan-bound trains stopped at the southbound local platform at Willets Point Shea Stadium, while Flushing-bound trains used the island platform. In 2008, Shea Stadium closed and was subsequently demolished, and a new baseball stadium was opened adjacent to it. This meant that Willets Point Shea Stadium would undergo a name change. However, this time, the MTA did not reach a deal which would have allowed them to have the rights to rename the station to Willets Point Citi Field. Instead, they resorted to the name millions of New Yorkers are familiar with, Mets-Willets Point. Now, this station was also where there could have been a new airtrain system. In 2015, proposals were made for this airtrain which would have started at Mets-Willets Point and run next to the Grand Central Parkway, where it would bring people to LaGuardia Airport. Construction was slated to start in 2019, but so far, nothing of the airtrain has been built yet. Now looking at the station today, it seems like a relatively normal station with an unsuspecting platform layout. But when it's just after a baseball game, this station can really crowd up. In 2019, 2,025,162 passengers used Mets-Willets Point, making it the 232nd most used station on the whole of the New York City subway system. It's also ADA accessible because of that ramp I mentioned which opened with the northbound side platform. The 2 other tracks are local, while the middle one is express, although there have been times though where I recall local trains terminating at Mets-Willets Point on the middle track. At this station, you can actually spot remnants of the original station that opened in 1927 under Willets Point Boulevard. At the end of the southbound side platform, you can see a gated-off portion of the platform that extends beyond the 11-car 7 trains. This is most likely a remnant of the original station that opened way back in 1927. There are also more steel structures beyond the station that also indicate that as well. Finally, at the eastbound end of the middle platform, you can look straight out and see an abandoned trackway frame which would have carried the original Flushing-bound local track back when the station was a local stop with only 2 side platforms. Also, as you can see, the station is only 350 feet from Citi Field. So that was Mets-Willets Point on the IRT. Now, I'm going to talk about the station on the Long Island Railroad. It opened in 1939 on the Port Washington branch, just in time for the New York World's Fair, so the station was originally called World's Fair. However, in 1946, the station was renamed to the United Nations because the General Assembly was actually located in Flushing Meadows Corona Park. In 1952, the UN moved to the east side of Manhattan, which meant that the station itself would be closed. Then, it was reopened under the original name on January 11, 1961, and 3 years later, the ramp near the entrance to the station would be expanded in preparation for the 1964 New York World's Fair. This also had the purpose of connecting Flushing Meadows Corona Park to Shea Stadium, which opened that year. Following the closure of the World's Fair in 1965, the station was renamed to Shea Stadium a year later in 1966. In 1985, the LIRR's Elmhurst station closed, and its location was on Broadway across from Cornish Avenue. In this picture here of the station's former location, you can still see the steel support beams for the platform to the side of the train trestle. But anyways, getting back to Shea Stadium Station, it eventually became the westernmost station on the Port Washington branch after the Elmhurst station closed. Of course, as I said before, Shea Stadium, the stadium, closed in 2009, and so the station was renamed to, you've guessed it, Mets-Willets Point, the same name as a 7 train station. And just like before, the LIRR station couldn't have Citi Field in its name because the MTA didn't have the rights to it. Now, just outside of the station, there is an access bridge which takes you to Mets-Willets Point on the New York City Subway, a mere 750 feet away. This bridge also takes you down to Flushing Meadows Corona Park. As you can see here, the LIRR station is only really crowded on game days, so at other times, it's quite empty. But getting down to platform level, you can see out in the open 2 abandoned platforms, which would have served tracks 3 to 6. The reason why the station was this large because it initially served the New York World's Fair, so it would make sense to have these many platforms in order to contain the crowd of people who were visiting the fair. However, after the 1964 World's Fair was finished, those 2 platforms were abandoned and this one was left in use. Now, this station actually sits parallel to the Corona Yard, which you can see right next to the platform with a few 7 trains parked there. Occasionally, you may even spot one being driven out of the yard to be put into passenger service. Now, from this station, you can also see 2 abandoned tracks that curve away from the Port Washington branch. At the northbound end of the platform, you can see what looks like railroad ties and rails within the bushes. This is a remnant of the Whitestone branch that actually crosses the Flushing Creek. Now, for the other abandoned track spur, you can see it across the Flushing Creek, about 1,000 feet away from the platforms. This was part of the Central Railroad of Long Island, so if you want to know more about that railroad, then check out that video. As for the Whitestone branch, check out the YouTube short I made on it. So anyways, that concludes this video on the 2 Mets-Willets Point stations. I'm genuinely excited to get back to making videos on the New York City Subway, and more videos about it will definitely be coming soon, so stay tuned. In the meantime, consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel. I'll see you next time.